Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. Today is July the 23rd, 2026. Today, what I want to do is to discuss the study of the classics. I want to explain what the classics are. And of course, this is very important in the wake of the release of Christopher Nolan's Homeric epic, The Odyssey. So, The Odyssey is literature from the classics. So, because I'm going to, I've been analyzing um, the movie, right, and juxtaposing it with the original work of Homer. Well, I haven't read an original work of Homer. I read a translation of works of Homer, right, English translations of works of Homer. So I haven't studied them in the original Greek, and you see that's what they do in the classics. So the classics, um, the classics are it's you can actually get a degree in the classics, right? There's a professor, Davis Hansen, who has a PhD in the classics, and many people obtain a degree in the classics, right? So the classics, or you could also say classical studies, right? It is the study of ancient Greek and ancient Roman or Latin, right? Latin. When you say Roman, you're referring to Latin as well. In that era, right? In the classical era, right? So, from the era of the Republic, from 509 BC to 27 BC, from the beginning of the Roman Empire. And of course, further, if you can go further back into the regal period, right? Prior to 509 BC, before the uh, overthrow of Tarquin the Proud. So the study of the classics, again, like I said, is very significant in Western civilization, right? That's a foundation of Western civilization, Greek and Roman, the study of ancient Greek, ancient Roman, the study of their anthropology, their architecture, um, their uh, their literature, their language, their civilization, mythology. So mythology that includes their gods, their ethical system, their philosophy, their belief system. So everything about them, their art, right? Their military strategies, their cities, archaeology, right? Archaeologists, they study their sites. So those are the classics, and they do it in the original languages, right? In Greek, so they study the literature, their works in Greek, and so works of antiquity, and sometimes it's combined. You call it the Greco-Roman, the Greco-Roman age. So the Romans conquered the Greeks, right? The Greeks came before the Greek civilization came before the Romans, and the Romans always thought that well the Greeks were smarter than them, but the Romans had, absorbed everything Greek. So you see, even the Roman elite, right? They spoke in their elite, their patrician class. They spoke in Greek. They wrote in Greek, right? Um, so uh, Romans basically inherited, the Greek culture and Greek civilization, and they continued it. So and so it's that study, right? Study of ancient Greek civilization, their language, their mythology, their architecture, everything. And the same thing with the Romans. It's called classical studies, classics, and you can get a degree in it. There are people who are specialists in it. It is, like I said, is the foundation of Western civilization, Western thought, right? When you're saying Western civilization, you're referring to Europe, right? And that includes America as well, because America, right, it was founded by Europeans and people who came from Europe. We're talking about the modern political systems, governmental systems that we know. Not talking about the about Native Americans, the Aboriginals, who were indigenous to the land before the arrival of Europeans. So that's normally what we're referring to when we say the study of the classics, their governments, their structures, their value system, right? Now that word classics apparently comes from Latin, right? It comes from Latin classicus, right? And it refers to the highest level of citizens, right? The highest order of citizens. It belonging to the highest order of citizens. That's what it meant, and it was synonymous with the patrician class. The patrician class of Rome were the elite, were the aristocrats, right? The upper class of Rome. And over time, that classicus, right, classics, it came to refer to literary criticism, and it came to be synonymous with uh, the highest quality of writers, right? The highest quality of writers of the age. Now, again, the classics, it's the foundation of Western civilization, and it's the foundation of the humanities. The humanities are the bedrock of elite higher education. So you find if you go and study in America's Ivy Leagues, right, you're going to engage in some form of study of the classics in your curriculum. You're not going to graduate from an Ivy League university. Doesn't matter what your major is, right? From the undergrad, it doesn't matter what you study. You're going to have a form of classical education. So whether you're going to study masterpieces of Greek, their literature or their writing or their art or their architecture, you're going to study them. It's going to be part of your curriculum, right? So it is a form of elite education, and people criticize, especially Americans. In the 19th century, they started to criticize, disparage this classical studies as being elitist, right? But understand that our founding fathers were all students and masters of the classics. They studied it. James Madison, who's called the father of our Constitution, actually took a year and studied the classics while he was at Princeton, right? It was called College of New Jersey then. It evolved to become Princeton University, and which is one of our Ivy League universities, right? So he studied it, and you see our government, the US government, is based on Greek and Roman civilization, right? A lot of our values, our ideals, even our architecture, right? So because our founding fathers were masters of the classics. Now, later on, the study of the classics in America, the era of industrialization and heavy materialism. Well, not that America hasn't always been materialistic, but elitism. Classical studies was now being disparaged as being elitist, but classical studies have remained very vital to this day for people interested in religion. Now, remember. The New Testament, right? The New Testament, all 27 books of the New Testament were actually written in Greek, right? They were written in Greek. So the early clerics, the early clergy had to master the classics. They had to study the classics, understand the language, the culture, the mythology, the mindset, the value system, right? So they could have maintain fidelity with respect to translation when we're translating the Bible, scripture. In fact, Martin Luther, who was responsible for the division of the church, right? The whole church was one before. Catholic means one, universal. But when he had the dispute over, is the elect are people saved by faith or by their works, right? It created great wars, the greatest, the biggest wars that Europe had known until then, and the church became divided, the Great Schism. So Martin Luther had that conflict, and so he went to study. He was a very brilliant man. That's Martin Luther. I'm not talking about the 20th century Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King's father named him after Martin Luther, the monk, the German monk, right, of the 15th, 16th century, thereabouts. he went to study Hebrew, he studied the Greek, he studied Latin, he studied the classics so he could understand the translation, the meaning of the words, the meaning of the phrases. And we see this is, the meaning of words is very significant for us now in this era of anti-immigration, ICE raids, the attack on birthright citizenship. That phrase in the 14th Amendment in the citizenship clause, subject to the jurisdiction, right? There's the push, to redefine that in Congress now. Um, because subject to the jurisdiction clearly meant something different 500 years ago. Subject to the jurisdiction 500 years ago in Europe meant you were a subject of the sovereign, of the king, right? Now, in this era of citizens, and in the 19th century, when the 14th Amendment was drafted, was written in 1868, it meant something, right? Of the framers, the drafters understood it to mean one thing, right? Uh, Subject to the jurisdiction, it meant one thing. Today, people understand it as something different, and that's why there's a push to go back to Congress and redefine what subject to the jurisdiction means in our Constitution. So you can see the imperative for the early clerics, the clergy, to master the classics, to understand the Greek language, their civilization, even their mythology. They had to study it to understand, how words were used, what did they understand, and so that's the study of the classics, right? So uh, I think our founding fathers will be proud because Americans, right, are very interested in Christopher Nolan's rendition of Homer's epic, The Odyssey, right? Which has made, it's made Christopher Nolan truckloads of money already, but the reviews have been a mixed bag, very mixed reactions, and so because I'm going to get into analyzing the movie in contrast, with the book which I've read, I enjoyed, and so when I'm discussing certain things like Greek mythology, the gods, the Greek gods, I'm not propagating idol worshipping. That's just an aspect of the classics, right? It's something the clergy would have studied, the early clergy would have studied. Um, People who are familiar with the Bible, you realize that the most prolific author in the New Testament, Apostle Paul, was familiar with Greek culture, right? Because there was a time uh, certain people wanted to worship he and Paul as Zeus, right? And was it Zeus and Apollo or Hermes? One of the so they understood the Greek gods, the Greek mythology. The person who wrote it in Acts, I think it was in Acts, Luke also understood this. So again, that's the study of the classics, right? It's not propagating idol worshipping or anything, because in subsequent videos, there are things um, I'm going to define and explain. That's with respect to an anachronism, right? Anachronism is when you project one age's values and attitudes, into another age, right? And presentism, right? Presentism, that's, for instance, seeing the past in current views. And then there's the anthropomorphism, anthropomorphism that occurred. Anthropomorphism is the personification of a deity or a god in human form. So if you see Clash of the Titans, you see this happened a lot, right? Liam Neeson played the Greek god Zeus, right? If you see the older version in the 1980s, starring Harry Hamlin, Laurence Olivier played Zeus, right? So, and it goes on and on. So this was very common amongst the Greeks, right? In Greek civilization. So you see in their literature, they infuse it with a lot of um, interaction of human beings and their Greek gods, right? And this happened in the Odyssey a lot. So I read the Odyssey. So my later critiques, that's why I had to explain what the study of the classics is. The study of the classics is basically the study of ancient Greek, ancient Roman, civilization, the language, their culture, their anthropology, their mythology, their architecture, and their literature. That's the study, right? So, and people study the original languages as well. Maybe one day, if there's time, I might be lucky and be able to learn the actual original Latin and original Greek. So that's I think this is sufficient for a discussion on what the study of the classics entails. And remember, you can actually get a bachelor's degree in the classics. You can get a master's in the classics, a PhD in the classics, a professor of the classics. Like I said, Davis Hansen. I watched his interview in which his discussion, his podcast in which he basically criticized Lupita Nyong'o's remarks, right? Her critique of the Odyssey, right? So right now, America is engaged in the study or a reenactment of the classics, right? The classical, uh, you know, piece of literature from the Greeks, right? From the Greek civilization, right? And the study of the classics in terms of the ancient Greek, it's typically from the 8th century BC to the 2nd century AD, right? And then the Romans take over from there, right? The Romans take over from there. And it's really interesting. So I hope this is sufficient. My name is Oluro Timiosha. I'll do more videos discussing Homer's The Odyssey, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.